Australian architect Marcus Barlow infused new interwar principles of Art Deco and streamlined modernism into his buildings. However, by the 21st century, sustainability and functionality are the core principles of architects' design philosophy for companies such as Studio 505 and Grocon. Barlow was an influential architect during the 1920s and 30s. His designs notably employed the principles of Art Deco that were utopian, historicist, eclectic, decorative, and commercial. This film will discuss Barlow's contribution to Art Deco design and theory, and highlight how, in the 21st century, climate change has redirected architects' attentions to the sustainable materials and technologies. According to the Encyclopedia of Australian Architecture, Marcus Reginald Barlow was among Melbourne's most prolific and accomplished architects of the interwar period. Marcus Barlow was born in 1890 and died in 1955. Barlow's education is relatively unknown, however he did attend Brighton Grammar School for his early education. For a short time between 1922 and 1929, Barlow was partnered with John H. Granger and John Little. He then later partnered with F.G.B. Hawkins from 1924 to 1927. One of his early commissions with all three of them was the Temple Court building on Collins Street. Early work included developing the iconic bungalow. By the late 1920s, he was focusing on developing commercial offices. He was a strong advocate for American modern architecture and urbanization, as well as the concept of car park buildings, such as the former Victoria Car Park, which was, according to the Victorian Heritage Database, different in kind to previous garages and predating the next multi-story example by 15 years. Due to Barlow's influence and passion for American modernization, Barlow was a strong advocate for skyscrapers in Melbourne. Perhaps Barlow's crowning achievement as an architect, according to the Melbourne Architecture, the Manchester Unity Building utilised many new materials and technologies, such as mass production of steel, concrete, tiles, and glass. The building still stands out in the CBD due to the fact that the outside of the building is coated in mass-produced tiles, which was very unusual, and still today, in 2020, it is rare to see a skyscraper covered in tiles. At the time it was built, it was the tallest skyscraper in Melbourne in 1932. It is a 12-storey office building, which is today being used as a dental practice. It hosts the first escalators in Melbourne, as well as having lifts that go up multiple levels, which was unusual at the time. Then on the left is the first escalator, which is still there today, and on the right is the inside of the elevators. This building was important in society at the time because it shows that Australia was catching up to the rest of the modern world. Due to Barlow's influence and passion for American modernization and development of skyscrapers, the Manchester Unity Building is widely believed to be based off the Tribune Building in Chicago, and according to the book Building a City, 100 Years of Architecture, Barlow also took the American Radiator Building in New York for influence. The Manchester Unity Building is a good example of Art Deco in Melbourne. The ceiling of the ground floor has a mural showing the development of Australia, starting from the history of Indigenous people up until the development of the building. This can be hard to see in photos, but it is the surrounding of the ceiling. It shows that the designers were reflecting and honouring the past as well as developing the future. The spire of the building reflects the Gothic era of buildings such as St. Paul's Cathedral, which is down the road. The ground floor is also covered in ornaments and decorations such as zigzag trimmings, large floor mosaics, and marble walls. These are there to display confidence and pride in the country. The use of shiny, expensive materials such as copper and brass on the lift doors, as well as the windowsills, gold paint for wording along the walls, and glass windows are used to exude the idea of expensive, fashionable, and forward-thinking designs. The Manchester Unity Building put a large focus on looking fashionable, forward-thinking, and patriotic because at the time it was built, the country was in the peak of the Great Depression. The Manchester Unity building was constructed in only 11 months at the apex of the Depression. The building came as a much-needed symbol of city revitalisation, according to the Encyclopedia of Australian Architecture. As the country was coming out of the Depression, there was a new demand for modern office spaces and buildings. Due to this, there was an air of excitement as there were large opportunities to develop a city like ones overseas in America and Europe, with modern offices and spaces to develop Australia into a modern city and country. The Pixel building was the first carbon-neutral building in Australia and has received 13 national and international awards for the design. I have asked the General Manager of the site, David Waldron, about the development's importance and connection with Art Deco and modernism.
So I'm David Waldron, and I was the Development Manager and the Design Manager for Grocon's Pixel building in Melbourne. Pixel was developed effectively as an experiment, looking at investigating methods that might be adopted in the construction industry, particularly in commercial office buildings, to create carbon neutral outcomes. The architects for the project, Studio 505, developed a very innovative series of approaches to the incorporation of building systems and architectural finishes and materials and arrangements such that carbon neutrality could be achieved. The perhaps most striking and remarkable part of the Pixel building's appearance is its external sun shading facade system, which is a highly articulated device to manage very high levels of daylight into the office space so that the lights can be turned off, whilst enabling sun shadowing so that blinds don't have to be used whilst you're using computer systems inside the building. You can trace that influence back to the way buildings have looked at providing shading and thermal protection well back in history, but in the modernism period and in Art Deco particularly, if you look at the way walls were arranged with solid areas versus glazed areas, where new technology was introduced to provide methods of cooling the building, providing early versions of air conditioning systems, early versions of vertical transportation systems. That period was an exploration of buildings as a system. Pixel does much the same thing from its skin through to its integrated cooling system in the concrete. It's a very low carbon concrete made with lots of recycled materials, and its adoption of gas-fired absorption chillers for the air conditioning. All of those things leading to a highly energy efficient outcome. And as I said at the outset, an experiment in what buildings of the future might have looked like back in middle of the first century of 2000s.
Barlow was an incredibly influential Australian interwar architect, and he has an important part in the development of modern Melbourne as a city. He used strong American influences of urbanisation and skyscrapers to create unique modern office spaces such as the Manchester Unity building. Barlow used modernism and primarily Art Deco designs to create his building spaces. He was designing during the prime time for Australia as a developing country, as it was a time of booming due to the country bouncing back from the Great Depression and World War I. The Pixel building, located in Carlton, is also an important development, and it is a landmark building for the modern aims of sustainable building designs. Although 21st century and 20th century design ideals have changed greatly, both buildings have Art Deco influences to create their office spaces.